Probably one of the most common questions that those of us with ADHD get is, what do you actually call it? Is it ADD or is it ADHD? People tend to wonder if there's actually a difference between the two. And if so, what exactly is it? Well, in this video, I'm hopefully going to clear this up for you. Coming up. Hi, I'm Daniel, and this is Journey to Wellness. And here on this channel, I make weekly videos spreading awareness about ADHD in adulthood and what it truly looks like. If you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on one of my videos. Now let's jump into today's. Okay, so before we get started, I've got to ask you, what do you call it? Do you call it ADD or ADHD? Leave a comment below, let me know. So is it ADD or ADHD? That's the age-old question. Well, the short answer is there's no such thing as ADD. It doesn't exist. The only correct medical term is ADHD. Good night, everybody. So now, why is there so much confusion around what to call it? Well, the basic answer to that is the problem stems from medical professionals from back in the day waffling on a name. To see what I mean, let's take a brief history of ADHD and where it came from. Now, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and the lot, they all use a book called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM. And they use this to correctly identify and diagnose all known mental disorders, including ADHD. It was first introduced in 1952 and has been updated 5 times now. Hence, we are now on the DSM-5. Now, the very first edition in 1952 didn't include anything that resembled ADHD. They didn't recognize it as a mental disorder at the time. Wah wah. It did, however, make it into the second edition in 1968, but it wasn't called ADD or ADHD. It was called hyperkinetic impulse disorder. Kind of a fitting name. And it remained that way until 1980 when the DSM-3 came out, and we then first see the term ADD, or attention deficit disorder. They changed the name. And along with it, ADD had 2 subtypes, ADD with hyperactivity and ADD without hyperactivity. Fast forward just 7 years, in 1987, they revised the DSM-3, and in doing so, they got rid of the term ADD and its subtypes and replaced it with ADHD, with no subtypes. It wasn't until the year 2000 that we got the name and subtypes that we have today, which are ADHD, primarily hyperactive, primarily inattentive, and combined type. Now, the hyperactive type is usually noticed in young boys because they're the ones literally bouncing off the walls, climbing all over everything, running amok, literally running all over the place, and just completely rowdy. Now, this is why boys tend to get diagnosed with ADHD far more than girls. And this is what most people think of when they hear the term ADHD. Now, as one grows older, this outward hyperactivity becomes more internalized, and it usually takes the form of mental or physical restlessness. These are the people that have very little patience. They don't like sitting for long periods of time, like in a meeting or a movie. They tend to move and fidget a lot, bouncing their leg, tapping their hands, these sorts of things. Now, the inattentive type is far less disruptive. These are the daydreamers. They're lost in their own thoughts. They're off in the clouds, space cadets. But they're also often rather quiet. And because of this, they tend to go unnoticed. And because they go unnoticed, it also means they go untreated more often. This is the category that most girls fall under, is the inattentive type. Now, what's interesting is in childhood, boys far more often than girls are diagnosed with ADHD. However, in adulthood, the ratio is practically 1-to-1, meaning that when these girls were young, they were overlooked and they didn't get diagnosed until they were adults. And as adults, the inattentive type doesn't really change all that much. Still highly distractible, still lost in their own thoughts. Now this is what most people call ADD. So that pretty much sums it up. The difference between ADD and ADHD is it's misnamed, but ADD is nothing but ADHD, inattentive presentation. But the correct term for it is ADHD. Now, there's also the third type, which is the combined type. And combined type, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. It has elements of hyperactivity and inattentiveness. And because of this is what most people with ADHD are. In actuality, those of us with ADHD can present differently day to day or hour to hour. One minute we can be more hyperactive than in the next, or from one day to the next. There's actually talk about getting rid of all the subtypes because we can look differently day to day and in different environments. For instance, we may be more inattentive and distractible at work, but more hyperactive and impulsive when we get around our friends. So now that we know that there is distinctly a solidified name, which is ADHD, why is there still so much confusion, even amongst medical professionals? I mean, some still see ADD and ADHD as two separate conditions when really they're just one and the same, just a different presentation. ADD is really just the misnaming of ADHD, inattentive presentation, which is how I happen to be diagnosed. Subsequently, I've actually been diagnosed ADD and ADHD. When I was diagnosed as a child, I was diagnosed ADD. But of course, since the name is actually ADHD now, I'm now ADHD when I was re-diagnosed as an adult. I'm curious, how many of you can say the same thing? Let me know in the comments section below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more. And until next time, take care of yourself and be well.